While the emperor was agitated by gloomy uncertainty as to the fate of the rearguard and its intrepid leader, Ney was performing one of the most brilliant feats of arms recorded in military annals.
At 3 o'clock, on the afternoon of November 18, 1812, Marshal Ney, and his worn-out Third Corps, numbering only 7,000 troops, followed by as many or more stragglers, are all caught in a deadly trap surrounded by their Russian enemies, while exposed and halted on a snow-covered landscape, 2 miles northeast of the town of Krasnyi. Ney is commanding the rearguard of the emaciated Grande Armée. 2 months earlier, French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte gave the fateful order for his army to begin its disastrous retreat from the Russian burning capital of Moscow. From its initial departure strength of 100,000 troops, the army has now been reduced to a mere 25,000 fighting soldiers, as they slowly trekked along the icy east-west road to exit the merciless Russian heartland. Freezing weather, vengeful partisan bands, merciless Cossacks, all play their role in reducing the once feared Grande Armée down to a fleeing rabble. But worst of all, Napoleon's nemesis, Field Marshal Kutuzov, commanding 80,000 troops, deployed in separated battle groups in the immediate region, is waging a war of slowly bleeding the French army to death, using a strategy of roadblocks and never-ending small-scale attacks. It is at Krasnyi, where Kutuzov's commanders, with their advantages in manpower and cannons, have waged a vicious 3-day battle with Napoleon's strung-out army corps, coming close to destroying them completely. Literally meeting the daunting challenge head-on, Napoleon personally leads his valiant Imperial Guards into action. A combination of direct assaults and feint moves manages to rescue and reunite the rest of his army that is lagging behind him. First, it was Prince Eugene's 4th Corps on November 16, and then on the 17th, Marshal Davout's 1st Corps is extricated from the Russian trap. Both corps are badly mauled in the process, along with the Young Guard, which almost ceases to exist while protecting Davout's escape from Krasnyi. The plan to also wait for Marshal Ney and his rearguard is in jeopardy, as they are now many miles away and too far behind the army. Essentially, Ney has been cut off. On the afternoon of November 18, Ney's corps arrives on the western edge of the eerily quiet battlefield. Ney expects Davout and his 1st Corps to be waiting for him ahead at Krasnyi. But he is unaware that very reluctantly 24 hours earlier, Napoleon gave the order for his army to continue retreating west, and as such, they would abandon Ney and the rearguard. Napoleon had received reports of Kutuzov's central and western battle groups racing to outflank the Grande Armée from the south. The Russian movement threatened to completely cut off Napoleon's escape towards and across the Berezina River. Ney must now fight alone. With just an hour of daylight left, Ney does not hesitate to push forward to Krasnyi. But, besides the menacing presence of Russian troops and cannons lining the hilltops on both of his flanks, ahead of him there is a ravine through which runs the Losovenka stream. His rearguard must get across it, with no other way except in a headlong assault. Waiting for them on the opposite side of the ravine is a well-prepared defensive block of upwards of 18,000 Russian troops, in a battle group commanded by General Mikhail Miroradovich. Besides outnumbering Ney's force 4-1, they have scores of cannons against Ney's 12 guns, and thousands of cavalry which far surpass Ney's last remaining mounted troopers. An unexpected rise in the temperature creates a mist that envelops the area. Into this ghostly and grim-looking backdrop, Ney launches an attack with his own 3 depleted infantry divisions, and the wrecked remnants of one of Davout's corps, which had been abandoned in its battle to break through the day before. Astonishingly, Ney's brave attack force of French, Germans, Portuguese, and Illyrians break through the first 2 Russian lines of defenders. But they are stopped by the 3rd line, when a terrifying salvo of 40 Russian cannons firing canister shot shatters the suicidal assault, and sends Ney's battered battalions back across the ravine, with heavy losses. Sir Robert Wilson, a British officer attached to the Russian staff, witnesses the savage combat, and recalled,
40 pieces of cannon loaded with grape, simultaneously on the instant, vomited their flames and poured their deadly shower on the French assailants. The Russians, most in advance, shouting their hurrah, sprang forward with fixed bayonets and without firing a musket. A sanguinary but short struggle ensued. The enemy could not maintain their footing, and were driven headlong down the ravine. The brow and sides of the hill were covered with French dead and dying. All the Russian arms were dripping with gore. And the wounded, as they lay bleeding and shivering on the snow, called for death, as the greatest mercy that could be administered in their hopeless state.
While Ney's troops rally, a dashing-looking Russian cavalry officer appears from out of the mist, holding up a white flag of truce. He has been sent by the Russian commander, with a formal request to Ney that he surrender. The defiant reply from the Marshal is expected, when he declares that a Marshal of France never surrenders. Ready for that answer, the Russian envoy follows up with a respectfully diplomatic appeal. He advises Ney about the hopelessness of his current situation, since the Russians vastly outnumber the Maroon Third Corps, and he's also made aware that Napoleon had continued on with the rest of his army, abandoning him and the rearguard. He appealed to the Marshal to save the lives of all those under his command. Ney is even offered a temporary ceasefire, so that he could send out his own officers to Krasnyi, and report back to confirm everything the envoy claims is true. But suddenly, several gun blasts erupt from the Russian lines. Some of Ney's startled men are hit by the cannon fire and topple over dead onto the snowy ground. Suspecting betrayal, Ney immediately detains the equally startled envoy as a prisoner, who actually manages to survive his captivity, and is released unharmed only weeks later. Marshal Ney renews the battle as he rashly orders another attack against the Russian blockade. But once again, despite their heroic efforts, the Third Corps cannot overcome the formidable Russian defenses. Watching this second fanatical attack on his unmovable defenders from a distance, General Miroudovich turned to a captured French officer beside him, and excitedly announces,
"Bravo! Bravo, French sir! You have attacked with astonishing vigor an entire corps with only a handful of men. It's impossible to show greater bravery."
But, in the combat zone itself, there was nothing glorious. Only a wholesale slaughter of Ney's attackers prevailed. Colonel Pelly is wounded 3 times while leading his 48th Line Regiment, which itself is decimated. The 4th Line loses 2/3 of their men. The 18th Line is literally cut to shreds by a massive swarm of Russian cavalry, which engulfs them and captures their eagle. Of their 600 troops that advanced, only 6 officers and 30 men survived the brutal combat. Ney now realizes that he has been abandoned, and he orders his beaten warriors to retreat east, back in the direction towards Smolensk. As darkness falls, the Russians, even with their superior advantage in numbers, hold themselves back from overwhelming Ney. They still strictly adhere to Kutuzov's strategy of restraint from risky all-out attacks. Many of the Russian staff officers are angered by what they see as their commanders' lost opportunities to wipe out Napoleon's army, as a whole or entirely in parts. However, even though, in the past 3 days of battles at Krasnyi, Napoleon has suffered crushing losses in casualties, and also with the 26,000 prisoners and 150 cannons captured by the Russians, Kutuzov proceeds with patience and caution, as his battle groups have also sustained some considerable losses as well. A few miles on, at a forest by the road, Ney halts his exhausted column that now numbers only 4,000 troops. The thousands of stragglers still painfully following, struggle to keep up. Ney then gives orders for many campfires to be lit. The Cossacks lurking nearby remain in the distance as observers. One Russian officer quickly reports back to Kutuzov that their hunted enemy is camped for the night, and he even boasts that the next day will see Ney and his rearguard, all taken prisoners. But the cunning Marshal is only creating the illusion that he's staying in place and is going nowhere. He has found a frozen-over stream, and cleverly observing how it flows, together with a ragged-looking map of the area he has on hand, he orders his troops and the accompanying stragglers to break camp and to prepare to set off north. They will look for the nearby River Dnieper. He intends to cross it and then forge ahead east over snowy countryside, to rejoin Napoleon, who he expects to be at the next French army supply base, at the town of Orsha, within 2 days' march. The venture seems impossible, but everyone around Marshal Ney trusts in him. Once the last stragglers have caught up with the troops, Ney has them all set off silently in the dark. The Russians in the distance beyond suspect nothing, as they look on at the multitude of French campfires, which are kept stoked and lit by a small detachment keeping up the ruse. It's not too long into their trek when, by pure chance, a local peasant is encountered. He reveals directions to the river Dnieper, and most importantly, shares knowledge of a bend in the river that has enough jammed ice packs there, which could permit a river crossing on foot. They trudge on towards the spot, but they're all alarmed by what they see. The ice packs are there, but they appear unstable and treacherous. Regardless, one officer ventures out to make the crossing. Very carefully he gets to the other side and back. After halting for a while, hoping the ice will freeze and harden some more, Ney finally orders the crossing to begin at midnight. They go forward cautiously, singly and in small groups. They either step carefully, or crawl on hands and knees. Slipping off the ice will result in a freezing, drowning death. The entire process is slow, and made worse by the steep slippery riverbank opposite, that also needs to be climbed over to get to safety. Some who make it across are too weak to climb up the slithery slopes, and slip back into the river, injured or drowning. Only the strongest will make it across safely. One lucky soul, who survives this perilous stage, is French General Freytag. He recalled,
"We slithered carefully, one behind the other, fearful of being engulfed by the ice, which made creaking sounds at every step we took. We were moving between life and death."
Another survivor, Captain Brickville, already badly injured, slips down the slope. He's frantically struggling not to lose his grip on a large, wobbly slab of ice. But luckily, right there on the river bank in front of him, stands Marshal Ney himself. The Marshal sees the man clinging to life, and reacts quickly to rescue him, by taking out his sword to cut off a nearby branch. Without a moment to lose, he reaches the stick out to Brickville, to grab onto. Ney then drags the fortunate man back onto land, alive. Only 2,000 of Ney's ablest soldiers, and perhaps as many stragglers, succeed in getting across. Many become traumatized with survivor's guilt, helplessly watching the suffering of those perishing during the crossing. Eventually, the remaining fragile river ice becomes too weak to allow the remaining 5,000 or more soldiers and stragglers to join them, including women, children, and the wounded. Into the cold darkness, the abandoned scream out across the river, begging not to be left behind, chilling the hearts of those who are in relative safety on the other side. Ney's last 6 cannons, his wagons and carriages, and his supplies, all have to be abandoned on the south bank as well. Only a few riders on their horses swim over to the north bank. Wagons crammed with wounded, that dare to make a crossing, break through the ice and slowly disappear together with their helpless passengers, beneath the surface of the frigid river. Ney and his remaining followers can only gaze back with pity at those abandoned on the south bank, one last time before moving on. They know that the prospects of survival for those left behind are dismal at best. For themselves, they believe they have a fighting chance at least, with Ney leading them. In the early morning pre-dawn hours of November 19th, Ney's depleted force marches west, into the relative unknown, while using the north bank of the river Dnieper as their guide. Marshal Ney remains poised and unbroken in his leadership. His soldiers do not waver in their own bravery. Multiple horse tracks are discovered in the snow ahead of them. They are not alone. Soon enough, Ney and his men realize their enemies are in the area, when they come upon a large village, where they capture 100 unsuspecting Cossacks found sleeping there. Their much-desired horses are taken too, along with plundered food to satisfy their agonizing hunger. It is soon learned from the Cossack prisoners that they're a detachment of a much larger force in the same area. The chief Russian Cossack general, Platov himself, is leading his 6,000 cavalry troopers and Cossacks on a strategic flanking mission, aimed at catching up with Napoleon's retreating army. They too are heading in the same direction as Ney. It is not long before Ney and Platov begin a series of cat and mouse clashes between each other, as they both lead their troops on a parallel course westward. Platov's horsemen remains elusive at first, not daring to take Ney on, in a major head-on clash. Instead, the Russians use their sled-mounted artillery to fire long-range potshots, keeping the gunners safely out of musket range of their helpless targets. Ney does his best to lead an orderly retreat. His personal bravery has long inspired the whole army. His courage at the Battle of Borodino motivated Napoleon to bestow on him the title of the Prince of Moscow. When some of his men openly express that they should give up and surrender, the Marshal responds by warning them of their perils of being taken prisoner. He also points the way to France and freedom. The way home tests the extremes of their physical endurance. Many deep ravines and thick forests are crossed, which breaks up the cohesion of Ney's column. An unexpected Russian ambush, hidden in some rough terrain, causes a sudden panic among Ney's ranks. The Marshal immediately turns the situation around, by barking out orders to his men, to make a bayonet charge against the ambushes. The brazen attack surprises and scatters their enemies. Ney fully exhibits his talented skills in military tactics. A year earlier, when he was campaigning in the Peninsular War, at the Battle of Redina, where he conducted a magnificent and successful fighting retreat against the Duke of Wellington, who led the British troops pursuing him. Tactics used in that retreat are being repeated by Ney once again. He adapts his troops' movements to the terrain. Early in the morning of November 20th, Ney's column set out on the march again, after having burned the village they'd just camped at. Now they're leapfrogging from forest to forest, using them for protection and shelter. Ney marches close to the river Dnieper, as much as was possible, so that his column's left flank was not exposed to the enemy. At one point in the morning, Ney's column has to veer away from the protective river bank, and is dangerously caught in open ground, with both flanks exposed. The Russians commence a heavy fire from their sled artillery, this time creating noticeable disorder among Ney's men. Platov seizes the moment to launch his Cossacks in a mass charge, to overwhelm their exposed enemy. But Ney forms his men into two solid squares, which fire and move in alternate relays, to support each other and keep the enemy attacks to minimal effectiveness. The Cossacks try to force a large number of unarmed stragglers towards the squares, using them as human shields. But their comrades in the squares refuse to let them come close, so as to spoil the Cossacks' plans to create a chaos among the squares, into which they would charge. The desperate fugitives have no place to go, getting picked off while stuck in limbo, in the freezing no-man's land, between two fires. Time after time it seems as if the Cossacks will overrun Ney's squares. In one of these squares, Ney arms himself with a musket and joins his men in the ranks, as a foot soldier. Inspired by their marshal's brave leadership, the squares survive and the Cossacks retreat. At noon, Ney rests his men at the next village they come across, and occupy it through to nightfall. During that time, they again successfully fight off numerous attacks, launched all day long by Platov. Despite suffering mounting losses and enduring the worst hardships throughout their march of some 20 miles in the past 2 days, Ney's little legion of stalwart survivors are determined to carry on. They break camp at 9 o'clock, and press forward towards Orsha. When Ney estimates he is somewhat close to Orsha, he sends out 50 of his mounted troopers to escort a Polish officer, who has the crucial mission to report to Napoleon or any friendly forces expected to be at the supply base, and to tell him to expect his arrival. Ney is not totally unfamiliar with the area. Just 3 months earlier, after the start of the summer invasion of Russia, Ney had led his Third Corps as the vanguard of the Grande Armée, and had fought at the First Battle of Krasnyi, in mid-August, against an equally impressive Russian rearguard. Ney's hopes lie on a razor's edge. He has led the last skeletal remains of his rearguard towards their salvation. Cossack scouts still follow them. Against all odds, unknown to him and his men, their miracle happens. Ney's messenger and his escort have evaded Cossack patrols throughout their own dangerous journey. They reach Orsha and are relieved to find Prince Eugene, and the remains of his Fourth Corps, are still there. Eugene is in disbelief, and is overcome with tears and excitement upon receiving the shocking news of Ney's survival and imminent rendezvous. Eugene immediately organizes a strong detachment of troops and cannons, and leads them out a few miles east of his base, intending to link up with the expected approach of Ney's column. Along the way, he has his cannons fire relayed shots, as signals to help guide the Marshal and his rearguard towards them. Eugene patiently keeps vigil, watching for any sign of Ney in the distance. In the meantime, Napoleon, who had given up on Ney's rearguard linking up with the army, receives word that Ney is fighting his way towards Orsha. He is thunderstruck and jubilant. Sometime overnight on November 20th, Out in the darkness, into the dimly lit frozen wasteland beyond, Eugene's men see a ragged formation of hundreds of shambling soldiers, quietly approaching them. One of Eugene's outposts challenges the vanguard of the mystery column. It is Marshal Ney, along with 900 survivors of his rearguard. The scene is emotionally overwhelming. Thousands of soldiers are greeting one another, as if reuniting with long-lost comrades. Eugene and Ney joyfully run into each other's arms and embrace. Their soldiers enthusiastically rejoice and celebrate among themselves. When the main army hears the news of Ney and the rearguard miraculously rejoining him, there is an immense elation that spreads like wildfire. This fervor was witnessed and vividly described by one of Napoleon's closest staff members, General Caulaincourt, who recalled,
"No battle won has ever produced such a sensation. The joy was universal. Everyone was as if drunk, everyone fussed and ran, informing each other of Ney's return. News passed on to everyone they met. This was a national event. The officers considered themselves obliged to inform even their grooms about him."
Napoleon himself, in his own ecstatic tribute to Ney's astounding feat, announces how he would give up his Tuileries palace treasury of 300 million francs to save a man like Ney. And he then christened the iconic marshal with an immortal title.
What a soldier! The army of France is full of brave men, but Michel Ney is truly the bravest of the brave.
But the heroic fanfare welcome is short-lived for these few intrepid survivors. Ney and his rearguard face the same two similarly cruel setbacks they had suffered just a week earlier, upon arriving last in the army at the supply base at Smolensk. They have little food waiting for them at Orsha, as the Imperial Guard and the other army corps, arriving there before them, greedily took most of the food supplies for themselves, perhaps in part, believing Ney and his rearguard were lost to the enemy. As for a well-deserved rest for the exhausted warriors, impossible. Eugene and Ney must quickly catch up with the rest of the army heading west. Napoleon is racing to escape the total destruction of his shrunken army, because Kutuzov's battle groups, and other Russian armies, are hurrying to close their net shut on their retreating prey. Napoleon's remaining 25,000 soldiers, surviving their horrifying retreat from Moscow, would face yet another crisis at the crossing of the Berezina River. And as for Ney, he would confront further perils, with yet even more incredible bravery.